simple. This event that we're having right now, this town hall, with these three candidates that have joined forces in this election, this has not happened in Lawrence before. This hasn't happened in Douglas County before. This is a monumental event that's bringing together three like-minded folks who care about justice, who care about their community, and who care about making Douglas County a better place to live for everyone. And you all here tonight are witnessing something that I think is really great, and something that's a perfect example of where our community is at right now. A community that's looking to unite around the ideas of justice and fairness for everyone. And everybody here is a part of that. So my name is Cooper Overstreet. I'm running for Douglas County District Attorney. And I'm running for DA specifically because our legal system in Douglas County is broken. Right, we live in Lawrence, we live in Douglas County. It's the most progressive community in the state, yet we have a legal system here that's in crisis. We have a jail that's just bursting at the seams, with folks that are there only because they can't afford to buy their way out and pay a cash bail. We have leaders, we have DAs and leaders in our criminal justice community who have, through their policies and their inactions, have led to that problem and have led to this crisis in our criminal legal system. And so I'm running for DA on the platform of a progressive prosecutor. Progressive prosecutors believe that we need to completely reevaluate what the purpose of our criminal legal system is, and we need to reimagine it. And here in Douglas County, that's what I'm seeking to do. I want to run on a platform that focuses, and I am running on a platform that focuses on rehabilitation instead of incarceration, that focuses on treating people in the system like people and not just looking at them like numbers, and not just warehousing them and feeding them into the prison industrial complex, which has ruined so many lives across this country. I'm an attorney. I'm a defense attorney. That's what I am. I'm from a small town down by Wichita. I was raised by a single mom. Didn't have a whole lot of money growing up, but my mom worked as hard as she could to make ends meet. And I saw sort of from a really early age, my mom's interactions with the justice system on a smaller level. And she got some speeding tickets when I was like 12, I remember, and it caused her to get her driver's license suspended. It sounds small, but it was actually really formative for me, because I remember seeing how worried my mom was about how she wasn't going to be able to feed our family because she wouldn't be able to drive to work and she'd lose her job. And I remember from that age, really starting to think about the justice system and just how fundamentally unfair it is to poor folks. Because if it's a system that we have that forces folks like my mom, somebody who I love and admire and respect, to have to make those difficult types of decisions, it can't possibly be something that we could ever call fair. And so that's why I went to law school. I moved up here to Lawrence about 15 years ago now. I went to KU for my undergrad, graduated from there, and then I went to KU Law. And ever since I graduated from law school, I've been practicing as a criminal defense attorney. That's all I ever wanted to do when I went to law school. I didn't want to do any civil work. I didn't want to, not that those aren't, admirable forms of law, but for me, criminal defense was how I felt like I could get into the justice system and work to make a difference from the inside. And so what I do now as a criminal defense attorney is I go into court and I tell folks stories. I talk about who they are, and I try to humanize them in the legal system, which works so hard to take away their humanity. I practice all across the state of Kansas in my practice, but most of the cases I do are right here in Douglas County. So I'm very intimately familiar with the failures of our legal system here in Douglas County and the failures of our district's attorney's office in really making our community safe and making our community one that is a model for progressive criminal justice. And so, as DA, what I want to do is I want to be able to take what I do as a defense attorney and bring that to the DA's office. It's time to have actual advocates in positions of power in our government. And that's why I'm so lucky to be teaming up with the two Shannons, because both of them are advocates and activists who care about their communities. And those are the folks that we need in power right now. Those are the folks who are going to hear the people in the community who are standing up and who are saying enough is enough. And so as DA, that's what I want to do. I want to focus on policies that end the systemic racism that we see in our criminal legal system. I want to eliminate cash bail. It's racist. I want to eliminate the war on drugs. It's destroyed countless lives. I want to create accountability and transparency in our DA's office, and a DA's office that brings local community groups, advocacy groups, activists into the DA's office and gives them a seat at the table to help better keep our community safe. And so that's why I'm running for DA, but that's really why I'm part of the justice ticket, because the justice ticket is the idea that community is more than just individual leaders. Community is a bunch of people working together to solve problems and to make the community safer and healthier. And so that's really why I'm excited to be a part of the justice ticket. And that's really why I'm excited here to talk about my campaign. And thank you all for showing up.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. This is a really nice turnout. And, you know, again, if you're new to voting, and a lot of young people that I speak with are obviously, or new to local voting, this is a really exciting partnership. This isn't something that happens very often, and it feels very hopeful to me to see individuals looking at their collective impact instead of looking to be the shining star. I really think that all hands on deck is the move right now, and I would agree with what each of you said, that this feels like a really pivotal time in our community where momentum is gaining for some issues that are life and death for a lot of families. So I want to, and a lot of the questions I'll say for folks who are not new to voting and who are really familiar with local politics, even more so than I am, a lot of the questions that I probably am going to ask are more to illuminate what happens in these positions typically, like what the responsibilities are, how these different seats impact our lives as citizens of Douglas County, just so people know what they're voting about. It's really important to know who the people are who are making decisions that impact your daily life. So I want to talk first about how this collective came about, and why you feel your impact can be greater as a collective rather than individual folks in your seats. And then I'm going to get into some kind of boring things about what even happens in the county government, except that it's not boring at all right now. And it's actually really exciting to think about the things that can be reformed and change the landscape for a lot of residents of Douglas County. So, but first, can I just ask, like, whose idea was this? It was my idea, but I didn't sell it to any of you. I thought it, and I think I pitched it to my neighbor. I was like, you know what needs to happen? And then, like, literally the next day, there it was. So I'm just wondering, did someone take the initiative and call the other two and say, what do you think about this? Or was it sort of more, I hate the word organic in this situation, but did it just come up?
So I would say that this is something, well, full disclosure, Shannon and I had been coordinating our campaigns before we came up with the idea of the justice ticket. We had talked about, when we were thinking about running, we had talked about that beforehand and we have the world's best campaign manager. Elise Higgins is fantastic and has done a lot of local organizing and really helps us stay organized right now, day to day. So Shannon and I had been talking about this, and it was something that did happen really organically because we have a lot of volunteers in common and a lot of supporters in common. And so there were conversations really early on about whether it made sense. But as we talked with each other and as we kind of talked through, as we listened to the policy decisions and the policy goals that we all have, we realized that there are a lot of shared values and a lot of shared policies. And the county level is different than the city level. At the city level, we have 5 commissioners who are all kind of voted on at large, and we have a city manager, and the city manager is someone who's hired to run everything within the city. So all of the department heads are then hired people who answer to the city manager, and the city manager answers to the commission. At the county level, it's a bit different because we have districts. So we're representing very specific areas as county commissioners, and we're working with other county-wide elected officials. So while the district attorney's budget is certainly influenced by the budget that the commission adopts and passes, the district attorney is elected separately. We have a separately elected sheriff who serves the entire county. And there again, the sheriff is running a jail that is funded by the county, but they're a separately elected official. So there are a number of county-wide elected seats. And I think it was really through conversations based on our shared values, based on our shared policy goals, that we thought we could make a lot bigger impact if we collaborated and cooperated rather than just thinking about this individually.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and I like, just to follow up on what Shannon said, it's like organic is, yeah, maybe kind of the wrong, I don't know, but like it felt right. Okay, like it just did. You know, when we this idea that, you know, progressives who are running on a progressive platform, you know, it's part of a movement. You know, it's part of this. It's not just an individual candidate. It's this idea that, you know, there's this call for change all across this country, and there's this call for change right here in Douglas County. And that, you know, when you have three candidates who are all, you know, saying those same things, who believe in those same things, and who are, you know, going to get pushback, right? That's going to happen because there's the status quo is the status quo for a reason. But when you have those three candidates, them teaming up and them collaborating with one another, and the idea that, you know, they're bigger than than the sum of the parts, you know, than the individuals. It's a great feeling, and I think it just kind of came from that when I saw that both Shannon and Shannon were running as DA, as somebody running for DA, I said, that's great. Those are people who really have good policies and they have good ideas. And those are ideas that I would, you know, not just as a voter, you know, see would be really appealing to me, but somebody who would be working in a collaborative government, you know, in a government with them would be great to move Douglas County forward. So it all just kind of fell into place naturally. And I don't know if there was one of us that decided whose idea it was. It was probably you, Meg. You're right. I think you probably willed it into existence.
Make things happen. Well, while I have you, Cooper, I want to know then, in speaking with Shannon and Shannon, has that in any way influenced your policy visions for the district attorney's office? Has there been anything that they've brought up that felt like new information or a perspective you hadn't considered? Sorry, that's kind of a tough question, but I'm just wondering if in your conversations together, there's been a moment that you were like, oh, that's a thing I hadn't considered.
Well, I mean, the thing is that, I mean, our policies and our ideas all kind of aligned with each other, though Shannon Reid I'd met before in the courthouse, but like, you know, Shannon Portillo I hadn't met before, but our policies, you know, just kind of aligned with one another, that we didn't even have to like have that conversation. We didn't even have to, like, they were so close to one another. But I mean, I think definitely, like, I've learned so much just from being in this justice ticket, just for the amount of time I have, because, you know, we all come from different fields. We all come from different spheres of, you know, the community, but learning from each of the Shannons about, you know, what it takes to be a courtroom advocate. Because I thought, you know, as a defense attorney, my job is to advocate for people, but Shannon, when she goes and she advocates for her clients, it's sometimes that's on the other side of the courtroom, you know? And so that, you know, learning about the complex dynamics of the criminal legal system from someone who works in it every day, like Shannon does, and learning about it from that perspective has just made me that much more informed of a candidate, and that much more informed of a district attorney who, you know, knows exactly where those folks are coming from on all sides. So certainly I would be lying if I said I hadn't learned a ton already from both Shannon. And then, I mean, Shannon Portillo, learning about, the idea that, you know, that so much goes into, you know, the learning and studying about equity and inclusion in our system and the systemic issues at play, which we all talk about all the time, is systemic racism, and the idea that, you know, these are bigger than just individual acts. But like Shannon's taught me exactly like what that means and how how to, quantify that in our system and what it looks like every day in our system. So I've learned a lot, and I will continue to learn. And I think that makes us all kind of well-rounded candidates.
Yeah. I find both of those women to be truly visionary and inspiring, and it makes me excited to think about folks like the three of you who have an imagination for what reform can look like, and enough knowledge to help us get there. So you're called the Justice Ticket. And I know that you have sort of bullet pointed several areas that you want to target once you reach office. Probably the one that gets the most attention and conversation is criminal justice. So I want to know a little bit more about how the county commission fits in that role. What sorts of things does the county commission decide that affects criminal justice for the residents of Douglas County? Shannon Portillo, can you answer a little bit to that?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest piece is the funding piece. And I talk all the time. I'm really nerdy. I'm just going to admit it. I got a PhD in bureaucracy. I like studying budgets, and budgets are values documents. And when we look at our budget, we are at a moment where our county commission on Kansas Day this year, I don't know why it being on Kansas Day broke my heart an extra bit, but our county commission voted to expand the jail, which meant that we wanted to put $29 million towards the expansion of our jail and increase our annual operating budget by $6 million. And I think the number one thing that we can do when Shannon and I are on the commission is make sure that the jail expansion doesn't happen. We need to fund the jail. We need to make sure that the jail is a safe space for folks, but we certainly don't need to expand it. We don't need it to get any bigger, and we need to use the funds that our county has to make sure that our community is safe. And we create safety by investing in social services. We create safety by investing in our community. We create safety by investing in the most vulnerable populations in our community. So the number one thing that we can do from a county commission standpoint is focus on where our dollars are going and making sure that our dollars are not going towards criminal justice expansion, but that they're going towards funding the services and support for folks to not become part of the criminal justice system from the start, but when they do become part of it, that we focus on rehabilitation.
And what sorts of services fall under the county's purview? The county budgets and makes allocations for various social service organizations in Douglas County, correct?
Yes.
And so that's an area where you are looking for an increase. So that would include services like?
So right now, the county does provide services to some nonprofits directly. So for example, Just Food receives some of their budget directly from the county. The county, while we have an independent health organization that serves both the county and the city, that's funded jointly by the county and the city. So the county funds our public health department, and we know we're in a pandemic right now. So public health is really important. But the county could expand the types of services and the type of infrastructure support that we provide for nonprofits. So we have a thriving nonprofit community in Lawrence and throughout Douglas County. But a big part of that is that we could provide more kind of backbone infrastructure support. So making sure that the nonprofits that we have don't have to think about building so much. We can make sure that we have spaces for our nonprofits to really thrive that make sense for them to operate out of, that we can provide some of the support for HR and some of the pieces that can help our nonprofits focus more on direct service so that the county can help with some of those administrative burdens.
Gotcha. And I know that when we talk about Douglas County, a lot of people's minds immediately go to Lawrence. So I want to just take a minute to discuss how are services impacted for residents who do not live in Lawrence, and do you see that there are opportunities to expand services and allocation of funds to other residents who don't live in the biggest town. Shannon Reid, you got anything to say about that? Sorry.
No, I would love to answer that. Yeah, I think so. In my role of working in nonprofits in this community for so long, it's pretty evident to me how the default for some of us and our systems can be pretty Lawrence centric and forgetting about the rural parts of our county and the rural communities. And that's something that we at the Willow are always in conversation about, and making sure that we are providing intentional and purposeful services to people in Baldwin and Eudora and Lecompton and out in the rural areas that are kind of in between the municipalities, because we know that there's a whole host of additional barriers of access. And when things are really centralized in Lawrence, transportation is a barrier for some people who don't have equitable services in their community. And you know, smaller municipalities have smaller budgets to contribute. And so it's my opinion that the county commission has a responsibility to really pay attention to those smaller municipalities in being able to provide funding support for whether it's the food banks, food programs, resource support for things like utility payments and rent, and things that we have a lot of centralized resources for in Lawrence that don't always serve the whole county. And I think that it's the county commission's responsibility to find ways to help bridge those gaps, to expand services to the whole county, to address things like transportation barriers. And so, you know, one of the great, like Just Food's mobile food pantry is a really great example of an innovative program to make sure that they are getting access to food security outside of just the city limits of Lawrence, and people who can't get themselves to the building to pick up food still have access. And so I'm really interested in increasing that awareness and just looking at ways to collaborate between more services that have an overlap in what they do and what their direct services are from day to day. Where is the overlap of that? Where can we make more efficient use of funding? Some of the ideas that Shannon mentioned about like helping with building management or HR type services and that kind of background capacity building for agencies, so that the staff focus of each of those agencies can be about serving people with a strong foundation, that they're not always trying to keep caught up or kind of treading water to pay those bills and make ends meet in order to keep serving people. They should have the support of their county commissioners doing that. And, you know, I work with clients that live in those communities that getting to their court cases is a huge barrier for them. Getting to Just Food, you know, utilizing the Lawrence Community Shelter if they lose their housing and are experiencing homelessness, to come to a community that they're not from and that they don't have as much familiarity with. There are a lot of barriers that I think have to be addressed and should be thought of on a county level about how do we help close those gaps and ensure that all of the places throughout Douglas County are getting equitable access.
Great. I think that's really I think it's really important for those of us who do live in Lawrence, and especially those of us in the downtown community who, you know, I mean, every day I go from North Lawrence to 7th and Mass. Like, my circle is very small. And so when I'm making these sorts of, you know, when I'm trying to be informed about who's going to be holding office at the county level, I know that I want to make sure that I'm not just centering my own interests and trying to imagine, you know, what it would be like to need essential services that I don't have access to, so, you know, somewhere that's not, you know, centralized and easier to navigate. So I appreciate that, that's something that you guys are thinking about. Have you heard anything specific from residents of either those smaller municipalities or residents in Douglas County who don't live in a town about what sorts of things they're feeling concerned about with regard to this election? Like, is criminal justice reform a thing that people are talking about all over the county, or is that happening here in Lawrence only?
I think that it's happening throughout the county. I mean, I can think of Well, one, those are conversations that I'm having in my work and have been having for years with both clients and other, colleagues that might live outside of Lawrence. And so I do think those conversations are happening. It's really robust in Lawrence and such. But as an example, at Occupy Mass last week, was that just a week ago? Time is weird lately, y'all. But at Occupy Mass, I ended up having conversations with a few people that were there from Baldwin who lived out in the country, who drove into town, who were talking about how they couldn't even remember the last time they came into Lawrence for anything, but were seeing what was happening in the community and wanted to come be a part of that movement. So I absolutely do think that it's happening elsewhere. And as a court advocate, I'm really interested in from the criminal justice perspective or the legal systems, in how to more cohesively coordinate and increase communication and cooperation between all the different municipal courts in those cities that are charging different, but also sometimes the same things. And there's kind of a natural working relationship between Douglas County District Court and Lawrence Municipal Court a lot, and that our county DA's office will refer a lot of cases to Lawrence Municipal Court. And I don't know that the evidence is there that we are coordinating in such a way with Eudora and Baldwin municipal courts, for example. And I think that those are things where continuity could be had, and that there's things happening in those communities that we may not have awareness of because they're not happening in Lawrence.
Right. Okay. Thank you for keeping those lines of communication open. Okay. This is a bigger question, and a question that has been heavy on my heart for the last couple of weeks. And I want to talk about really how we make this community safer for Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and what sort of help people at the county level need from, say, the state. Like, what are the barriers? I know that I've heard a lot of conversation lately from folks that are like, Cash Bill, you can't do that. You can't do that. It's not a thing that's in your power. So what sort of advocacy do you need at the state level? Who does that? Do you advocate for yourselves? What sorts of supports are in place for you there? How are you going to get where you want to go? How quickly can you get there? This is a really big question, but I want to know, like, how do, Cooper, and you can start with this, like, what would a just court system look like in Douglas County to you, and how are you going to get there?
I mean,
who's your team?
That's the question, right? And that's sort of the question that, I think the first step to anything, and I think the first step in Douglas County, because we have to first take off the blinders. We have to understand that here in Douglas County and in Lawrence, we're not immune. We're not immune from issues of systemic racism and of poverty and of, things that are happening all across the country. Just because we look at ourselves as progressive, and we do have a progressive element here. We do have folks that want to step up and want to, contribute to a forward-thinking community. But we have to first acknowledge that those things are happening right here, and we have to listen to, the activists and the advocates who are down seeing these things happen every single day, and, acknowledge they're happening, and we need leaders who are going to do something about it. And, the criminal legal system has gotten a lot of attention, lately, and obviously because of all the things that are going on nationally, and people are finally starting to see just for the first time, I read a statistic recently that for the first time ever in the country right now, the majority of folks think that Black folks are treated unfairly by the criminal justice system in our country. That's the first time that number's gone above 50% ever. And that's because we understand, and more folks are seeing these injustices play out every single day. The bottom line is you need county leaders who are going to acknowledge that. We say it all the time. We need leaders that will acknowledge Black Lives Matter and that they'll do something about it. They'll act, because just acknowledging it And, saying you're going to do these things isn't enough, and knowing what those things are. So, I'm very, in my campaign, I'm lucky enough to have, progressive prosecutors all across this country that I look up to, that I've seen do these things in other counties and other jurisdictions, where they're tackling the same issues in their criminal legal systems. And they're doing things like ending cash bail. They're doing things like creating holistic approaches to criminal justice, and they're really completely changing the metrics of what one would think is success in the criminal legal system. Like they're going from this idea that your district attorney has to be the chief law enforcement officer, and we're only going to get elected because we're going to tell folks that we're tough on crime, and we're going to tell folks that we're going to put folks in jail. But what we've seen is that narrative that's been sold by our politicians for the last 40 years has led directly to mass incarceration in this country, and our prison population being over 2 million folks, and an increase in our prison population of 400% in the last 30 years. So these, I'm just looking to change that narrative as what I can do as DA. I'm looking at folks to know that a DA is a very powerful elected official. They can decide who gets charged with the crime and who goes home to be with their family. And that's an absolute power that they have that can't be overturned by a judge or anything like that. And so that DA then has to, engage in criminal justice practices that will make the community safer by acknowledging that incarceration wholesale, like we've seen, doesn't make communities safer. It takes folks away from their family. It takes them away from their job, takes them away from the drug treatment, the mental health treatment that they can get in the community. And so we need leaders who will just say that, and who will say, instead of saying, well, I guess the solution is to build a bigger jail, that's not a solution to this problem, because it fails to look at the root causes. And the root causes, we know what they are. They're poverty, their racism, their lack of access to resources. And so looking at those things, and figuring out where they are and funding them, and respecting the groups in our community who already provide those resources and bringing them in and giving them a seat at the table, that's first and foremost what our leaders need to do. And Shannon as county commissioners, certainly that's a big role of the county commissioner as well.
So when you're answering to, sorry, I'm just going to build on this question a tiny bit. When you're, and this comes from a question from a viewer as well. When you're answering to communities who maintain that the entire legal system primarily functions to maintain and advance white supremacy and patriarchy, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQIA folks, immigrant communities, who are looking at the way this system works and has worked to maintain white supremacy in our community, what's the single most important thing that you could do to change this evidence-backed belief?
First of all,
is it ending cash bail? Sorry, go ahead.
I love that question, because it is so on point that we have a lot of evidence on how the system upholds white supremacy. I would say the single most important thing we can do is change our budgets. What we fund is what we value. And if we fund people, we're demonstrating that we value people. And if we're funding criminal justice systems, we demonstrate that we value punitive measures that disproportionately affect people of color, particularly Black people in our community. And so I would say ending cash bail is one step, but we also need to fundamentally change our budgets. And I do kind of want to go back to your earlier question, Meg, because I think that there are a lot of really legitimate concerns about things that need to change at the state level. And I think right now is a moment where we're seeing a lot of change. So Governor Kelly put together the Commission on Racial Equity and Justice and is looking for—
Which you sit on, congratulations.
Thank you. I think that it is an opportunity to do some real work there, because she's looking for what are things that her office can immediately put in place from executive order and within executive agencies. What are some legislative things that we can lobby for in our state house? And then what are some recommendations that we can give to local governments, both county and city level local governments? And so this is a moment where we can collaborate across local government levels in the state to really push for some change. And I think when we say these are the state policies we need to change so we can have a more equitable Douglas County, it's a moment where let's let's go after those policies. Let's do it. Let's try to make that change at the state level and at the county level.
Can you tell me a little bit about how, and this doesn't have to be a long answer, I'm just very curious, how does cash bail function inside the county budget? Does it just feed court fees, or is it something that the county banks on taking in a certain amount every quarter, let's say?
Well, do you want me?
Go ahead.
Or
Go
I
ahead.
don't.
Yeah.
Anyone who
Well,
has a notion of that.
I
Like,
mean,
for
I have
example,
ideas.
if I had been arrested last week and I paid $200 to get out of jail, where does that money go?
Well, I mean, hypothetically speaking, in that scenario, if you're like, if it's cash that you pay as the bail, then from out of your own pocket, then it should come back to you at some point at the end of the case, right? Or it should be used to pay your fines and fees at the end of the case. The problem is, Meg, that what we see in our system right now that we have set up is that folks' bonds are being set so high that they can't post them with their own money. I mean, and for a lot of folks in our community, a $200 bond is cost prohibitive. $200 is how much somebody might make in a month.
Sure, and if you don't have $200, then you're not going anywhere.
Then you don't go anywhere. And, to say right now, that RDA right now isn't asking for bonds like that for people that get charged with misdemeanors in Douglas County, that's just not true, because I've been there. I was in first appearances just 2 weeks ago when I saw somebody from our current DA's office asking a judge to give somebody a $200 cash or surety bond on a misdemeanor case, which I just felt like was just ridiculous, because that is basically that bond. The sole purpose of that bond is just to keep that person in jail for no reason other than just to punish them for being poor. And so, in most instances, when you have a bail bondsman you have a bonds company that pays your bail, right? That money goes directly to the bond company. That money goes directly to the insurance companies that underwrite that bond, and that goes to banks. And I would be lying if I said there wasn't a really, really big industry based off of cash bail in this country. An industry that is, predatory, an industry that feeds into a lot of different narratives that actually end up, feeding the systemic racism in our criminal legal system. The idea that we have folks benefiting from this system makes it that much more necessary to eliminate it. No one should ever make a profit off of anything that happens in the criminal legal system, including prosecutors, including bondsmen, things like that. So that's why, ending cash bail is, something that's been done in a lot of jurisdictions. And it's also just because cash bail doesn't work. It doesn't work to keep communities safe. It doesn't work to make sure folks show up to court. I just tell you, speaking from my own personal experience, I don't think I've ever had a client who posted a cash bail and then skipped town, right? Or that, skipped town because they didn't want to go to court. Usually the reason people don't go to court in the first place is because they don't have the resources to even get to court. They don't have the ability to take off work, or they don't have childcare for their child in order to go to court. They don't have their car breaks down. And, unfortunately, judges and prosecutors, when somebody doesn't show up to court, they don't care the reason why they didn't show up to court. Well, then what they do is they issue a warrant for that person's arrest, and that person goes out and gets arrested by the police or the sheriff's office. They get put in jail, and then what happens? They're supposed to put up another cash bond. And, on a case like that, the system itself, it's just an antiquated system that doesn't keep our community safe. And it's one that it's very easy to eliminate if you have DAs and prosecutors who will say that they're just going to take the steps to do that. And the first step is that as DA, every single case at first appearances, I get to go in and I will ask for individuals to be released on their own recognizance, which means that they're going to be released without having to put up money, and they're just going to be told to come back to court on their court date. I will also set up systems in place so folks aren't needlessly having to come to court, that they're not missing work in order to come to court, that we're giving them, we're doing it best as possible to give them resources. I've, as a defense attorney, I've had experiences where my clients have had no choice but to bring their small children to the courthouse. And they've actually been, chastised by the judge for bringing their children to court. And my response is always, well, judge, otherwise they would have had to stay home with their child and then you would have had them arrested, right? And so that can't be a system that we want in our county, in Douglas County, that system that punishes folks because of their lack of access to, resources that would help them in the justice system. So cash bail, of course, it's the major driver of mass incarceration. It's a major driver of the, criminalizing poverty. And any DA nowadays, anybody running for DA should never defend the use of cash bail, the wholesale use that it's been used for, which is to criminalize poverty. And so that's the first step, I think. To answer your original question was like, is there any one item that's like the most pressing in the criminal legal system? I think that it's fundamentally like we need different folks. We need to completely reevaluate the metrics that we're using to determine what the justice system is for, right? And so that starts with really acknowledging the harm that it's caused on so many people.
All right. Before I go any further, I do want to remind folks that if you are watching and you have any questions, I want you to feel free to do that. You can either post them on the Facebook event page, and I'll take a look at those, or I think there's probably a way for you to type them just in the chat bar over here and keep an eye on that. You can drop it in the chat. Okay, here's a good one. My last jury duty, the pool had only one African American. How can that be addressed? Also, how do we change mandatory sentencing rules at the county level? Okay, Cooper, I know I've heard you speak in other forums about mandatory sentencing. I want to speak first to Shannon Portillo, because I feel like your research on this might be able to speak to both parts of this question.
Yeah, so I would say that the mandatory sentence piece, that's something that we are going to have to work with the state to make sure that we're adjusting some of our legislation in the state. And that is something that the Commission on Racial Equity and Justice is going to take a look at. So that is one where our county can't act separately, but our county can be advocates and can push for change at the state level. And I think if we are one of the biggest counties in the state of Kansas. And I think that if we kind of make a good argument why we need to change some of these mandatory minimums, this is a moment to make some of that change at the state level. Jury pools, that's a much more difficult question. When we think about the population that we're pulling from, when we need everyone to register to vote, that's how a lot of the jury pools, that's where we're populating those pools. But we have a pretty small population of people of color overall in our community. And so we need to make sure that our juries reflect the folks who are going into the criminal justice system. We need to make sure that as we see people go through the process of jury selection, that we're not getting rid of folks of color who can serve on the jury. But that's a difficult one because our population overall is pretty small. And so I think we need to be a more welcoming community that becomes more diverse.
Mm-hmm. And possibly increasing participation at the in elections. That's again, like you said, that's where the pool is drawn from. So making sure that people understand where the power is in the vote, or I guess the real statement there would be changing things so that there is power in your vote, and so that you really do feel like you have a way to speak to your elected officials and that they're listening to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think Shannon Reid wanted to jump in on this one.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that exactly what you guys are talking about, that it is a root cause of it is voter disenfranchisement. And some of the things that we're already talking about, that there's perhaps less feeling of investment or connection to local elections and local elected officials by communities of color who have been historically disenfranchised and marginalized and targeted by their governments and by their local systems. The fact that you can't be a registered voter with a felony conviction, and we know that felony convictions are disproportionately impacting Black and Indigenous and Brown people, And so like there are a lot of factors, and then exactly what Shannon said, right, is that we are an overwhelmingly white community, and that shows up in all kinds of places just by default. So then I believe that it's the duty of people in power and in positions of power who are figuring out what either the algorithms for those selections are, the processes by which those selections are happening, to be intentional about ensuring that there's more representation. And I don't know what the nuts and bolts of that is, but I think that it's a really worthy question of how are we just randomly pulling names, you know, based on some algorithm that is not intentional with making sure that there's representation of people from different races and from different economic statuses and from different parts of the county also, because Douglas County District Court is charging people with crimes throughout the entire county. And so those jury pools, while they're going to naturally have a higher volume of people from Lawrence, there could be some more intentional factoring going into ensuring that the whole county is represented at every level of our county government.
Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering that. Before we get to the next question, somebody else just wrote in a question. I just want to take one more minute before folks start to drop off, that the last day to register to vote is July 14th. You can check your voter registration at ksvotes.org. Make sure that you know where your polling place is. If you're not going to do a mail-in ballot, advanced voting does begin on the 15th. There is an extra advanced voting site in the old Sears building out on Iowa. Is that the one that's like behind
Texas Roadhouse?
Behind Texas Roadhouse. So, and it's big, and they, you know, so for social distancing and folks who are concerned about that, advanced voting is a really great idea if you know that you have your mind made up. But you know, there is a lot more to learn in this primary season, and I think that there's a lot of really important things that folks want to cover, and this is actually one of them. This is a question about a specific case, so I don't know if anyone is even able to speak to it, and if you're not able to for whatever legal reasons, I understand, but Albert Wilson and what anyone can or would do for him. So I don't know if anyone here is even familiar enough with the specifics of the Albert Wilson case to weigh in on that. If you are, you can raise your hand, candidates. If not, I will keep moving to the next question.
Meg, I'll say something.
Okay, yeah, please.
So
you're all lawyers, so like I don't want to get anyone in trouble.
Well, I'm not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer.
Okay, great.
Shannon's got closer credentials to be a lawyer than me, probably.
I have a PhD. I studied the law, but I don't have to practice it.
And I don't have any degrees, so I definitely don't have a law degree. But what I'll say as a advocate who works with people, survivors and victims who've experienced interpersonal violence, is that for me, the Albert Wilson case is such, it's a miscarriage of justice in a lot of nuanced ways, I think. And what I always think about with that case is wondering if the person who brought forth the report, whom the case was supposedly prosecuted on behalf of, actually feels a sense of justice, which is always where my heart is at and where my brain is at when it comes to prosecutions of any violent crimes. And I will also acknowledge that I remember being in the courtroom much of the week or 2 weeks that his trial was going on. And first of all, noticing that it was almost an exclusively white jury, back to the question we just had, and watching the story of that case unfold. And the fact is that my experience tells me very, very few people are actually prosecuted to a point of conviction for sexual assaults. It's actually quite rare and does not happen very frequently. And there's a lot to be said about that. But I find it interesting that a Black man was sentenced to maximum sentence when we rarely even see convictions happen for most prosecutions of sexual assaults. And many of the white people that I have seen prosecuted for those cases either successfully got their cases acquitted, or they got the lowest level of sentencing possible, and he got the harshest sentence possible. And so for me, it's always about what is the larger systemic issues at play. And I think that Albert Wilson's case has quite a few glaring examples of that. And then otherwise, my heart is just with the person that was called as a victim to testify, whose testimony is required for that, and what that process was like for her. Because the fact is that people talk about whether or not I'm, as a citizen, going to press charges against another person for whatever harm was committed against me, but people don't press charges. Only prosecutors press charges. People can choose to file a police report and report what happened to them to law enforcement, but then once that report happens and it goes to the prosecutor's office, the entire decision-making process is in the hands of that prosecutor. The victim of that crime, the person who made the report originally, has no say in that decision-making. And so to me, that's a huge problem in our system. It is not a victim-centered practice, which is allegedly what prosecutors' offices are about, is protecting public safety and the interests of victims of crime, yet they have no voice in the decision-making process.
And that extends, I think, into law enforcement as well. And I understand that the police department is not under the purview of the county, but I think that there have been some glaring discrepancies in police work in Douglas County, and who is investigated and who isn't. So I'm just gonna put that out there as a thing that I've noticed and would like to say out loud. We have another question on the chat. How do you intend to end the war on drugs? Is the plan to not charge those with user amounts? What about those who are selling or caught with more than user amounts? So I'm assuming this is for you specifically, Cooper, not necessarily for the ticket. And whoever wrote that can correct me if I'm wrong. So this is about drug charges. How do drug charges play into the DA's office? And what are your thoughts on, it looks like, charges as they relate to the amount of substance that someone is caught with?
Well, sure, that's a good question. And, I think it is actually a question that Shannon will probably, that the county plays a role in too, because I think it once again goes back to, this idea that, we bring so many folks into our criminal legal system right now who don't need to be brought into that system in the first place. And like every time, like I look at that, when I drive down Mass Street and I look at the Judicial Center and I look at it and I just think of like how that building has just affected so many different people's lives, right? It's affected so many different people's lives, and a lot of them for, in negative ways. And, one of those ways is, the war on drugs, and the idea that folks are getting brought into the legal system because they have addiction issues, because they have lack of access to resources and everything, and lack of access to, family support systems that would help them if they were white and privileged, And so I definitely think that, the county comes into that, because those are, Shannon said it earlier, where are our funding priorities right now? Where are our funding priorities? I'll go back to it. We've been sold this narrative in this country, and it's a narrative that's taking a while to get rid of, and it's been successful. Politicians have got elected on it, which is that drugs are out there, and they're killing people, and they're violent, and that they're contributing to crime, and that they're a big part of the crime problem, that we need to really be tough on drug prosecution. But we all know now that that was just a narrative that was sold just to detract from the actual work that needed to get done to actually get people's communities, get people access to resources, to get them out of, having to be addicted to drugs. And so really a big part of my platform is treating drug offenses, not as criminal conduct, but as public health issues. We all know that, the majority, I think some statistics like 97% of the arrests that happen in this country, or some insanely high amount, are for non-violent offenses in this country. They're not for people going out and, you know, assaulting people or, you know, committing murders or anything like that. It's for, you know, offenses like a young black kid getting stopped and frisked and having, you know, some pot on him and then getting arrested and going to jail and getting a $200 bond. You know, that is not something. So as DA, specifically, the policies that I will enact is that in order to end the war on drugs, diversion is going to be the rule in my office, not the exception. And when I say diversion, that means diverting people from the criminal legal system, getting their case as early as possible when it comes to me and saying, you know what, this is a case that doesn't need to be charged. Instead, this person is going to go to a treatment program that exists in the community. And if they don't do that treatment successfully, I'm not going to punish them. I'm not going to convict them. I'm not going to send them to jail. We're just going to try another alternative, because we know eventually if we can make their treatment not contingent upon them going to jail or not, but instead upon them actually getting better, then it'll work and it'll take hold. So as far as possession cases, you know, my policy is that I won't charge a gram or less of narcotics, because anybody who has a gram or less on them, it's simple possession, it shouldn't be charged. Our DA now, you know, he likes to say that he's decriminalized possession of marijuana in Douglas County. I would actually argue, and from my anecdotal experience seeing how cases are charged, is that, you know, he's actually taken the majority of the simple possession of marijuana cases in this county are actually prosecuted in municipal court. And municipal court, nothing has been decriminalized there. That's still very criminalized. But what we've seen a lot of recently
And expensive.
And very expensive, right? Once again, that's about talking
Municipal
about
court is expensive.
barriers to justice, barriers to access. It's expensive, especially if you can't pay anything. Then it gets
So,
even
and
more.
even diversion, though, sort of creates its own set of challenges for individuals and causes them to miss work because they have to make these appointments, and can be a real hassle for someone who, say, was found with some weed lotion in their car. Let's use that as an example. That hits your desk, technically illegal. Do you, as the DA, have the power to say, I'm just not even going to charge this kid? It's weed lotion. He needed it for his knee.
Well, I mean, I have the power. Yeah, I have the power to determine which.
Like, can you just say?
Cases don't. It depends. I mean, obviously, it depends on how much of the weed lotion there is, because in Kansas, there's. But I mean, I'm assuming in that instance, what you're describing would be what we call simple possession, right? And my policy as DA will, yes, be to take a case like that, and instead of charging that person with a crime and bringing them into court and making them have to come into court and be a part of our system, instead we're going to explore. And this is where, you know, the diversion thing is something that I have in my platform that's completely different than other DAs in this race, is that my platform is about pre-charge diversion, which is the idea that you divert a case from the process before the prosecutor even charged that person with a crime. So that way, if that person screws up while they're on diversion, it's not going to end up with them having a conviction on their record. Because it's after charge diversion, if that diversion gets revoked, then that person has a conviction on their record. And in fact, we see that happen all of the time in Douglas County, because diversions are burdensome. We condition diversions on things that poor folks can't, conditions that they can't meet, like paying fines and fees. As DA in my office, I will not revoke anyone's diversion because they can't pay fines or fees. That's a completely, that practice makes no sense. And it's once again led to the criminalization of poverty. So yeah, I mean, it's about, you know, looking at the crimes that actually cause our community harm. And marijuana should be legalized in this country. I think everybody knows that. But as a DA, of course, in Kansas, it's not legalized. And so what you need to do is, as a DA, you need to make sure that you're keeping the cases out of the courthouse that are cases that shouldn't be in there in the first place. And drug crimes, by and large, are cases that result from lack of access to resources, and they're not violent offenses, and we'll treat them that way.
So what do, I just want to ask this quickly for any of you who have thoughts on it, on that subject, and then we can go ahead and wrap up. This is going to be a heavy way to end this. But having spent the day trying to find resources for someone who needs help with an addiction or mental illness, and just hitting closed doors all day long, because if this person hasn't committed a crime or done anything violent, then getting support and finding access for services for them was really tough. So how does county support of social services and maybe trying to help improving access without involving law enforcement? I mean, obviously what we don't want is to make an already difficult situation more traumatic, right? By encouraging someone to do something dangerous or criminal so that we can get the police to come help us with this underlying issue, right? So how do we, is that something that that the county and the jail system and the sheriffs and the DA's office all have a collaborative effect on? And do they even talk about it? Is that conversation already going at that level to your satisfaction at this point? Go ahead.
It's definitely not happening to our satisfaction, or we wouldn't be running for office. And we wouldn't be collaborating on the justice ticket. Not to speak for all of us. I think a big part of the reason why we're doing this and why we are in this collaborative effort and saying that this is a moment where we need real systemic change is exactly because of that. We need systemic change. We need to decouple the ability to get behavioral and mental health services from the criminal justice system. Right now, the #1 provider of behavioral and mental health in our country are criminal justice institutions, because we've defunded and moved away from having any sort of social safety net for behavioral and mental health issues. And so what we're going to do is do everything that we can from our individual positions to work collectively toward systemic change and decouple the ability to get social services from the criminal justice system, because we should be funding social services. We should be funding behavioral and mental health. Hard stop. That's it. We should fund that. We should make it available. It shouldn't be contingent on being involved in the criminal justice system. In fact, it shouldn't be. It should be a standalone thing that people can have access to, so they're not a part of the criminal justice system. So they never have to enter into that space.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we can do a lot individually in our offices, but we can do a lot more collectively when we as a community say that all of our offices know the system needs to change, so let's change it.
Yeah, I mean, between Cooper deciding that it is not a good practice, it's not a good use of resources or time and energy of his office to criminalize drug use as an addiction that people are struggling with. That's really a key component. And then the other key component is absolutely having more robust treatment and recovery systems and options in our community that are, I believe in harm reduction. That is a lens through which I look at everything. And so to me, that means that we do need more treatment options available, and treatment that is not contingent on, as you just described, Meg, having some sort of criminal charge against them, having court orders that tell them that they have to be there. Like, we need to get past the notion that you need this punitive consequence for people if they won't participate in sobriety. And we also need to debunk the notion that we should be forcing people into sobriety, and that a harm reduction lens tells us that that's not effective. And while it may be a goal of many people and many treatment centers, there are things like safe needle exchange programs and clinics that provide support to people from a harm reduction lens that actually help them do exactly that, reduce as much harm on themselves and their families and their communities if they are going to continue to use substances, and to not be criminalized, but figure out what the unmet needs are, what the root causes are, and why there are reliances on substances to survive for some people. And how do we, as slow as it takes, chip away at the barriers that they're facing to feeling as supported and healthy as possible. And so we have to be willing to think of more radically creative ideas about what it means to actually show up for people who are struggling with something that doesn't deserve to be criminalized, because it is a public health issue, and it should be a responsibility of community leaders to provide an actual variety of treatment options. And as somebody who's worked with so many people in our jails, and specifically trauma survivors who are incarcerated most often for things that are a direct result of or a byproduct of the interpersonal violence they've experienced. And oftentimes those things are drug crimes, quote unquote. And then jail becomes this forced detox center where literally they're being kept in jail with these high bonds or no bonds, and in the examples of having their probation revoked, because the courts believe that they have the authority to force sobriety on somebody without the actual support and advocacy and safety net that is necessary for somebody to actually retrain their brain and move into a different way of living. That takes time and really intentional focused services. That doesn't happen in jail. You can't just force somebody's sobriety through forced detox by not letting them out of jail and then tell them to go get treatment or else. That doesn't work. We know it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's just walking on a tightrope. So you might make it a little way, but yeah, I agree that a more solid foundation of multiple layers of support is definitely, in my experience, has been far more beneficial. So I'm really excited to hear the three of you in concurrence on so many issues that just in my life here, both at work and in my neighborhood, hear people saying are important to them. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I know that I am a little bit scrambled tonight. I did have a kind of a tricky day. So, and I got back into town like 8 minutes before this started. So I kind of had to shift into this mode. But this has been, this has actually felt really restorative for me to listen to you share your visions, and just to hear people who have such a broad imagination for how far we can go. Like I want to be on that boat. I do. So I am in full support of the justice ticket. I want to be on the record as saying that both as a business owner and a resident of Douglas County, I support the justice ticket and each candidate therein. I don't think that historically have really put the full weight of my business and person behind political candidates. I've always said vote. I think I've always made my personal positions very clear so people could draw conclusions. But I feel really strongly about this team and what they could be able to accomplish for issues of criminal justice reform, housing justice, climate justice, which we did not even touch on. But there's like so much more to talk about that's on your collective ticket. So I don't know. I'm down to do another one of these and would be happy to do that maybe on a day that was less taxing than this one was. So on just the note of my support, there is a fundraiser pending. There is pie, so you can win a pie. I will be baking pies and we're going to raffle them off along with some other great prizes from some local businesses, Raven and the Bourgeois Pig and Liberty Hall, Granada, Bottleneck. There are others that I know I'm not thinking of right this second because I did not write them down before the meeting, but we'll have that.
Cottons.
Ramen bowls, cottons, and we'll have all of that. The raffle should be live by tomorrow. So you can buy a raffle ticket, which will support the campaign of these candidates. If you liked what you heard tonight, or if you just want to win a pie, but you should know that that's where your money's going to be going. So we should have that up and live for you all to look at tomorrow, and I'll have it posted on the Ladybird Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages, and I'm sure each of these candidates will share it as well on their respective pages. Candidates, do any of you have anything you want to say before we sign off for the night?
Just a huge thank you for your support, Meg. That means the world to me individually, to us collectively. Thank you for creating this space, and thank you for pushing our community to have important conversations. I appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. And if folks want to get in touch with you or ask questions specifically of you, they can certainly do that on your respective social media pages. I hope some young people who tuned in tonight learned some things about how county elections might affect you, your friends, your family, your neighbors, why it's important to vote. Please register by the 14th if you haven't already. Please vote in this primary. It's a really important election for not only residents of Lawrence, but all over Douglas County. We have a real opportunity here, I think, to make progress with this progressive ticket. So again, sorry for my sort of scattered self tonight, but
Perfect.
Meg, thank you
I
for
hope
being.
it felt casual. It was very casual.
That's good. I like it. I needed that energy. So thanks for that. And thank
Thank
you
you
for
so much.
being such a dedicated community builder. I mean, since the moment that I've met you and the first meal I ever had at the diner, like that's just what you do. And it comes so naturally to you. And you're always thinking of ways to build community and really connect with people. And that means a lot to me. And your support and endorsement of us means a lot to me. And for anybody who hasn't registered to vote yet or hasn't requested your mail-in ballots, we do also have those paper versions of things. So if you don't feel like going digital and you want to go a bit old school, you can reach out to me especially, and I'll bring you what you need and I'll turn it in for you.
That is very fun. That's a really nice offer.
Thank you so much, Meg. And everybody, register to vote. And you know, this election is just crucial for so many different things in Douglas County, but the times make the candidates, I feel like, and that's what we have is the justice ticket, the three of us running on a progressive platform of change and things that can be done and that will be done. So thank you so much, Meg, for putting this together. I appreciate it so much. Everybody, you know, go register to vote, and thank you.
All right. Look for that raffle, y'all. I'll have it up tomorrow. Have
Good
a
night,
good night.
everybody. Thank you for coming.
Bye.